Diem didn't hesitate to use the most sincere attitude with this person, but there was no reaction. The man seemed to recognize her and raised his head to ask if she was Diem. Upon hearing this, Diem replied that she wasn't necessarily looking for him, but she had heard about him and didn't expect to meet him here. After a moment of silence, Diem slowly stood in front of Danuang and Toto and said that he was Thotlatia, having met Thaitu, and didn't find anything unusual. Diem then took a carrot from her bag, took a big bite, and asked casually about their brotherhood. The man chuckled and identified himself as Tufam Fungdi, also known as the Wild River Spirit. Tufam was an organization. Diem asked with interest, but signaled to Danuang and Toto behind her to run if they had the chance. Fungdi raised his bowl of porridge and said loudly that Tufam was Thotlachia's business, asking if she wanted to join. He had invited Diem to join Tufam straightforwardly. Diem smiled and asked about her qualities and abilities. Fungdi laughed and said not to underestimate herself, as not everyone had such abilities. Over 90% of the specialization in Thapto, Thaitu was attributed to Tufam. This name was the most painful scar for their organization, especially concerning everything related to her. They were particularly attentive to her, including Diem. First, Fungdi wanted to know if she wanted to join. Diem smiled mysteriously, not saying anything more. Fungdi stared at Diem and advised her to think carefully because they were serious about Diem Phu. Tufam had 10 masters, and they also had their own trials: birth, aging, illness, and death, along with the 5 elements and fortune-telling association. 5 years ago, one of the masters had died. Thaitu had betrayed Tufam and sneaked into the 10 masters, leaving 4 vacancies. Whether it was a master or an old owner, it wasn't an empty title but real power and authority. If Diem stayed in Diem Phu for a long time, she wouldn't reach this level because Tao Vianqiu had defeated the head of the 5 elements. It was almost impossible for her to compete for his position. But if she agreed to join Tufam, Fungdi would introduce her to inherit Tuko as a new generation of masters. After a moment of silence, Diem said she had a few questions to ask him. Was Puivanho killed by him? Fungdi admitted it straightforwardly, saying that the divine decree was also in his hands. Diem shuddered inwardly. The situation was even worse when Puivanho hadn't died yet. So what was his purpose? Fungdi straightened up and said he wanted to clear the way for his teammates to escape. Did she know why they were called Thotlachia? Diem shook her head. Fungdi explained that Nam Diem Phu, the legendary guardian, had created the world. Each fruit on the tree was a completely new world, but the essence of Diem Phu's fruit contained infinite potential and life force, known as the core of Diem Phu's fruit. Normally, only when the fruit naturally withered could the operatives have a chance to take the core. However, Tufam's strength was unique in Diem Phu. They could use brute force to extract the flesh inside the fruit when it fell, leaving only the core. But because of this, they were called the parasites of Diem Phu. This was also the first time they had removed the flesh inside the fruit to extract the core. Talking about this, Fungdi's face darkened. He looked at Diem and asked if she refused his invitation. Diem thought for a moment, intending to speak, but the temple bell rang. It was already midnight. A chubby boy in a red belt jumped down from the altar, kicking his feet. The lantern beside him turned into a demon's face with 2 people, and the boy dropped the candle, laughing mischievously. The noise echoed as dozens of kids like him jumped around, causing chaos everywhere. At this time, a girl walked in, knocking on the door. Immediately, all the children turned their attention to her. The girl stood with her hands on her hips, wearing a light pink dress and carrying the golden rooster. She looked at the chaotic scene with a stern expression. After the children ran out from the main hall to the courtyard, the girl stepped in and softly said that some incense guests wanted to pray to Buddha or ask for divination. Diem quickly asked the girl to examine her friend's wound. Fungdi glanced at the divination tube on the altar and requested a divination. The girl put down the golden rooster and approached Toto from behind. Her cold fingers touched the wound, causing Toto to groan in pain. Then she said that Toto's wound was very serious and needed medical treatment. Seeing Danuang nod, Diem felt relieved and thanked the girl. She led Toto into the quiet room. Fum Di went to the table and picked up a bamboo stick, hanging it over a strange style of divination. After shaking the tube disdainfully, Fum Di threw it down. Not long after, a stick fell, and Fum Di read the message. Diem picked up the tube, and a stick slipped out, crossing the mountains and seas, traveling through forests and oceans. Diem stroked her chin and handed the tube back to Dan Huang deeply. Dan Huang took it respectfully and bowed on the altar. "Please divine for me the Trungandok stone quarry, avoiding worldly suffering," she said. Diem shrugged and muttered to herself, intrigued by Qin Jiang's unpredictable nature. Fum Di slammed his hand down on the table, dismissing it as just a game and not bothering to respond to her answer. He asked what she would do now that they were less than a meter apart. The purple-white energy of Tufum gathered in Fum Di's hand. Diem asked in a low voice if she wouldn't be able to leave the temple if she didn't agree. Fum Di nodded without hesitation. Diem chuckled wickedly, her sinister aura becoming increasingly intense. She spoke slowly, saying that they should see if he had the capability. Besides, she predicted that she would refuse to join Tufum. Fum Di said nothing more and waved his right hand. The terrifying energy of Tufum surged towards Diem. Diem turned her body to avoid it, clearly dodging the deadly white energy. Hai Tham Han's fierce attack tore through the air, rushing straight towards Tufum's energy. A silver streak flashed, and a tiger-headed spear pierced through Fum Di, drawing a drop of blood on his neck. A young girl with snow-white skin and captivating beauty appeared behind Diem, activating her hidden attack. She moved swiftly like a bird, thrusting her spear fiercely, pressing the seal on the tiger-headed spear, turning it into a golden-white light enveloping Fum Di. Before it could land, a pink figure behind her waved her hand, and white feathers flew out like a snowstorm. In the blink of an eye, Fum Di was completely frozen. Diem lowered her head to look at the frozen Fum Di, remaining vigilant and not letting her guard down. She activated her bloodline immediately, causing the ice to shatter into pieces. Blood splattered from Fum Di's body. At this moment, Dan Huang also arrived in the main hall. She saw the girl treating Toto's wound and stopped her hand. Dan Huang smiled and waved to the girl, apologizing as they had to leave urgently. Diem didn't turn back, but rushed out of the main hall towards the temple gate. Her voice echoed, stating that she had initiated the blood laughter, causing total damage and additional damage. After being reinforced, the 9 phoenixes reached 728%, and your status was temporarily lost, with a special duration of 73 hours. Cohoch Due Inheritance Transmission, the wood branch dried up and the tree greened. Your current awakening level of Cohoch Due is 56%. You have awakened the state of laughter through laughter. Diem's speed increased rapidly as she ran away from the place. Meanwhile, in the main hall, Fum Di was displaying the highest level of Diem's abilities. All her consecutive moves, including the Great Wind Technique, the Blood Battle Strike, and the Demon Extermination Strike, caused almost maximum damage. His gaming device lay broken on the ground, and his Kamal outfit was torn. The golden viscous liquid covered him entirely, emitting a heavy aura. He smiled faintly, saying that while Tufam's power was formidable, in the end, it was still controlled by its master. Despite having a bit of difficulty, he watched how far she could run. He pressed a button on the remote control in his hand, and the energy of Tufam continued to chase after Diem. A white streak accidentally grazed Diem's neck, and she quickly tilted her head to avoid it. The skin on her neck was eroded, but she took a large apple from her bag and chewed on it. But the wound still didn't heal. At this moment, Toto flew to Diem's side. His voice sounded concerned as he asked if she was okay. Diem didn't answer but asked Han about Toto's wound. Hearing the answer that it had healed, she felt somewhat relieved. Then she instructed him to stay away from the white streaks and said they would contact each other later. Meanwhile, in the main hall, Fum Di was still controlling the gaming device, and the golden liquid surrounding him gradually disappeared. The girl returned to the main hall, only to see the scene before her eyes. She sighed softly, saying that their incense guests were kind enough to let them stay overnight, but they had caused such a mess in the temple. It was a pity. However, Fum Di paid no attention and continued to look at the gaming device. His body, originally injured, had now fully recovered, and his suit was intact again. As a deity under the seat of the three temples, it could also be considered a limit. The reproduction of the small fruit species. A white streak rushed towards the girl, and she lightly touched her finger. Instantly, countless fairies appeared in front of her, clearing the way. Soldiers rushed up to block the attacks, but as soon as they touched the white streak, they all turned into void. The girl couldn't believe her eyes and disappeared along with Fumdi under the influence of Tufam's energy. The entire Nuong temple gradually disappeared. Fumdi stepped out of the temple, completely stripped of by Tufam. Suddenly, he startled and his bones froze. His face showed a hint of agitation for the first time. It couldn't be the power of 9 phoenixes, could it? At this moment, Diem swooped down from above, looking back at Tufam chasing her. Riding a motorbike, she couldn't escape. The space for maneuvering was too narrow, and she couldn't avoid the terrifying white streaks. Tufam's energy had covered half of Indo. The Diem Phu didn't move at all. In front of Lam's Temple of Merit, the man with the knife stared at the other person. The man's arm had been broken by him, turning into a white bone without any blood. But he didn't care about the wound. In just a few breaths, his arm had completely healed. He moved his injured wrist, asking if there was any other trick left. Chatudeo threw a cigarette on his hand, glaring at the other person with disdain and speaking slowly, saying that the recovery was fast. Toto flapped his wings and landed, his voice echoing, instructing the chef to finish the job and not to go to Nuong Temple anymore. The man was stunned, not understanding why the plan had changed, but the color of this bird's feathers was exactly like Diem's Toto. He felt reassured eightfold. Taking advantage of the man's distraction, he punched hard. The man reacted quickly, using his knife to block the fist, but he seemed unaffected by pain. He continued to press down with his fist, forcing the knife into the man's face. Suddenly, the man fell back, blood spraying out. The large man then lunged forward, embracing the man and biting into his neck like a savage beast. Blood spurted as the man's teeth sank in, thirsting like a vampire. Suddenly, his expression changed, his face and blood leaking incessantly. At this moment, the man exuded a murderous aura, his body engulfed in hot smoke. The big man was about to release his grip when he realized he was being held tightly. A cold voice sounded, asking if he could withstand the fire technique. Within the man's arms, red-purple flames erupted from him, engulfing the other man. The flames gradually subsided, and the man stepped out bare-chested. Meanwhile, on the wall, the man looked down at the city, unable to believe his eyes at the deadly white color everywhere. What kind of demonic creature was this? His opponent had just been completely decapitated. Blinking, the man carefully observed the situation below and told his companions that they were lucky to escape the main trap of the peaceful city. But their luck wouldn't last long. At this moment, the companion also had to admit his calmness and clear analysis. He activated the Diem Phu event system, continuously warning of the death of the wandering souls. He sighed, realizing that the living souls were almost gone, and most of the locals had died. In an alley leading to the center of the imperial palace, Yendo Fengdi walked slowly forward, pushing the remaining souls into a corner with Tufam. Meanwhile, Diem hurriedly ran through the alley and suddenly collided with someone. Both of them startled and took a step forward. Their 4 arms clashed together, the sound echoing. Diem opened her eyes, looking for an opportunity to punch the opponent in the face. Suddenly, 5 colorful lights rushed towards Diem. She dodged to the side, stopping her fist. The two looked at each other, realizing the danger. Without many words, Diem avoided Vosen and ran towards the imperial palace. "I don't have time to fight you, go away," she said. Vosen also stopped attacking. Yem Swanline stepped forward, chasing after them. Diem admitted defeat this time. "Buivanho, tell him to change the command back, otherwise we'll all die," she replied. "Buivanho is dead, and we can't retrieve the command. The one who did this is the escaped person. I won't fight back. Let's just run," Vosen said in surprise. The escaped person? Before escaping, he must have been a wandering soul. His power exceeds that of the wandering souls dropped down. The post-land event can't sit still, and he must have infiltrated it specially, Vosen said as they ran, one after the other. Diem asked Vosen if he had ever encountered the escaped person. Vosen shook his head, saying he hadn't met him. But he had been at Diem Phu for over a year and hadn't eaten pork, but he had seen pigs run like that. I think, when will the Diem Phu people have such a big disturbance like this? They can't sit still, Vosen said strangely. I'm not sure either, Diem replied. At the private residence and the palace, Diem and Vosen had just arrived when they saw several black spots rushing to both sides. On the left was Yem Xuanlin, looking tired, with similar clothes and appearance as never before. On the right was Yem Xuanlin, accompanied by Chu Tam, Chu Vo, and the man with the knife. 9 people faced each other, stopping in tension. Those who had met unconsciously stood next to each other, clearly divided. Chu Vo shielded Chu Tam, looking alertly at Vosen. Chatiyudeo and Diem glanced at each other, then turned away as if they didn't know each other. The atmosphere was quiet. After a while, Yem Xuanlin, the unfamiliar wandering soul, looked at Diem, the man with the bun hair holding a bow and arrow, pointing at Diem. The strange black feather aimed at his forehead, and the deadly centipedes swarmed in the air, shaking violently. The grotesque and beautiful face was filled with vitality. Thousands of centipedes formed a black knife covering the man. And if Diem hadn't spoken up, the man's brain would probably have been eaten away by now. Diem and Vosen stood in the middle, looking at the 6 people around them. Diem whispered, "Bu Van Ho is dead. His promise is no longer valid. All the wandering souls are here. You can count them yourselves. Whether you pretend to be foolish or not, if you want to survive, you have to find a way to deal with the one behind." As soon as she finished speaking, Fumti's voice echoed from behind. "Who's behind there? I've already refused his invitation once. There won't be a second time," he said as he walked slowly forward, leaving white streaks erasing everything. Diem's face turned cold as she stepped back a few steps. "Just follow his command in his hand. Whoever is capable can find him," she said with a straight face. Fumti laughed mockingly. "I don't know if you're stupid or clever, brave or foolish." Before Fumti's mocking words, Diem remained indifferent. "The one who harmed us is him. If you have the skills, then attack." The man with tied hair and pursed lips said nothing. Using the red mirror but seeing nothing, he shuddered. What level of threat is this? Since entering Diem Phu, he had never encountered a situation like this before. At this moment, Vosen stood unsteady in front of Fumti. Diem looked at Vosen, asking in surprise, "What are you doing?" Diem really couldn't believe asking for real. Vosen didn't know what stray bullets were. Just pointing at the city wall that had turned white. Gruesome death was not far off, maybe in 10 minutes. We would all die in one fell swoop. Who knows, if we don't die, we'll still suffer. Then we will definitely die a miserable death, regardless of whether the Diem Phu people arrive on time or not. To die without getting justice. How do you know you'll lose to him? Diem remained silent, not knowing what to say to confirm. Before that, he had attacked Vosen with bloody, aggressive tactics, enhancing by 728%, but he remained unharmed. Such power, how could the wandering travelers cope? Diem didn't refute Vosen's words, just smiled. "You're right, I think I was wrong." Vosen also didn't waste time to take out the white wine bottle and drank in one gulp. Behind, sharp-eared scouts also raised their wine bowls, tilting their heads back. Vosen staggered. Then at one point, the scouts also threw their wine bowls. Black gas rose behind them. Mumbling, "Little girl, you now voluntarily hand over back exit to me. My power can add Yem Xuanlin. We can win this battle, and maybe save your life. Think carefully." Chu Tam drew the dragon-detailed sword and stood ready. She didn't bother to look at Vosen, bluntly saying, "Dream on." Vosen laughed and strode forward. "Anyone who doesn't want to die, follow me for a gamble." Chu Tam bowed and pulled out the sword, preparing to charge. Suddenly she stopped, only to see Chu Vo holding her hand and pointing behind. At this moment, all the wanderers, except Vosen, stood still, observing coldly. Toto looked at Diem and asked softly, "Shall we act?" Diem's face darkened, gnashing her teeth, saying, White energy. Tufam charged straight at Vosen, who was charging. Vosen turned around. Tufam slammed into the ground, creating a deep pit. Vosen thought to himself, such terrifying destructive power, not to be trifled with. Red light gathered in Vosen's hand, forming a blade that slashed straight through Fumdi's heart. But Fumdi's wound had no blood, just spurting muddy water, rendering the attack ineffective. Vosen was startled. Tufam wasn't his original ability, but the Hona water spirit, so he easily executed the attack. Their palms touched, 5-colored light appeared, turning into a bright blade rain in the blink of an eye. Sharp 10 blades of 5 colors stabbed into Fumdi's body. Like Fumdi was happily smiling, indifferent. The sharp blades pierced through the body. Muddy water suddenly spurted out. He brushed his ear and jumped back, not only avoiding Tufam's attack from behind, but also pushing Tufam's energy towards Fumdi. Despite being on different sides, Chiu Tam had to admit the skillful strike. Just as Vosen smirked, Fumdi below disappeared. Muddy gold water surged onto the ground. A hand reached out from the water. Fumdi squeezed Vosen's neck with 4 fingers. He whispered beside Vosen, "I really appreciate you. Too bad, it's too late." Fumdi pushed Vosen's head towards Tufam. Suddenly 2 streams of red and gold flames erupted. Fumdi quickly retreated to avoid it. Vosen almost got his nose touched by Tufam. Then someone grabbed his back collar to escape death in the blink of an eye. Chetyudao appeared with a knife at the critical moment to save Vosen from death. The 2 quickly retreated before the gold water. Chetyudao's feet moved swiftly like a hot iron, emitting high temperature, firmly tearing apart 2 red marks on the ground. Maintaining a steady posture, he said to Vosen, "The speed and strength of that guy in the vest are on par with us. That's a skill." Though he said so, he secretly thought the health and physique of the guy in the vest certainly belonged to an elite breed superior to them. Like the overwhelmingly powerful white energy. Fengde looked at them with a bright smile. The lingering grief in the squeezed water can wash our souls clean. The murky squeezed water can wash our feet clean at that moment. The sword of the literary official emitted a white air stream, slashing down with terrifying force. The blade cut a long scar onto Camthan's foundation. Until it collided with Tufam did it stop. Fumdi dodged in a hurry, looking at the ant split in half next to him. Mumbling, "Backtrack." The power of the blade made everyone dizzy, they couldn't believe it. That little girl could swing the sword so powerfully. Chuvo touched her forehead and whispered, "I told you not to act hastily. This is not the crucial moment." Chiu Tam emitted a green light all over her body behind. Backtrack stared at Fumdi intently. White energy gathered again. Fumdi panicked and raised his hand. A stream of Hongha water shot towards Chiu Tam's forehead. At that moment, a stream of green water appeared, cutting off the golden water stream. Chiuvo landed and spewed out a large mouthful of blood. The wound before had not healed, now forcing her form, made her overstretched, seeing Chiuvo injured. Chiu Tam got angry again and wanted to advance. But Chiuvo quickly stopped her. He secretly thought the initial words of the cat general were correct. They also understood that the drunk guy was stronger. He didn't want to sink with them at all. At this moment, Vosen, Chetyudao, and Chiu Tam all advanced, surrounding Tufam. Suddenly, the man with tied hair leaped up, pulling a golden bow and arrow straight at Fumdi. Fumdi just raised his hand and then lowered it, a stream of muddy water swallowing the arrow. Then, with terrifying speed, the stream engulfed the entire head of the man with tied hair. The man behind him, who had intended to flank Fumdi, was now in dire straits. 2 giant hands emerged from behind, lunging straight at Fumdi's solar plexus. Fumdi did not flinch. Instead, his right hand gripped the old man's face, his thumb and index finger pinching the old man's eye sockets. The golden water flowed backward from below, while mud erupted, engulfing the old man without a trace. The horrifying scene left everyone stunned as they looked at Fumdi with horror, his face cold. The turbulent water bubbled. "Playing with you has improved my spirits," Fumdi said. At that moment, in front of the death gate, which had been distorted by Tufam, waves of golden water crashed into the city walls. The 5 phoenix towers at the death gate completely collapsed. All that could be seen was the rushing golden water. Vosen, unintentionally, looked at Diem, feeling a sense of helplessness surging within him. Did he know that Fengdi still held the upper hand, hence not making a move? Initially, Fengdi stood on the murky water's surface, looking at the people opposite him, suddenly delighted. Finally, Fengdi also reached the Daiho Palace boundary of Diem Phu. The objective was accomplished. Fengdi raised his 5 fingers towards everyone, preparing to unleash the final blow to end it all. At that moment, a loud bang echoed across the sky. Fengdi looked up at the sky, the pitch-black night engulfed by a black curtain, growing even darker within the clouds. Red lightning flashed across the sky, full of spider web-like cracks. A naked man fell from the sky like a meteor, landing directly on the golden water surface. Vosen clenched his fist tightly, looking at this man with fervent eyes, murmuring, "This is the master, one of the 10 masters." In the crimson thunder's roar, Taovian suddenly descended, landing on the boiling water's surface. At midnight, Fengdi smirked. Now things are getting interesting. Diem knew that this battle was no longer under her control. She looked at Toto and said, "Go back to Longhosen, for you know the way." Toto looked at Diem in bewilderment, the dragon leather lantern in his hand still unused. Last time in Huangsan, he was played by Vosen, exhausting his fighting strength early, so he still regretted it. He hoped he could help Diem later, but now he was asked to return to Longhosen. Seeing Toto's lack of response, Diem turned away in annoyance. "I'm serious." Toto sighed but said nothing, tears rolling down his back as he turned away. A white vortex appeared, and Toto looked at Diem with sadness, before gradually disappearing into the vortex. Watching Toto's figure disappear, Diem suppressed the urge to rush into the battlefield, pulling the kidney-shaped belt from the spatial imprint. Diem tightly grasped the belt in her hand. Today's victory or defeat lies here. Hopefully, the belt can withstand Fengdi's attacks. In front of the Daiho Palace gate lay a shattered object resembling an amber-colored brain, the size of a square yard, lying motionless. The object's outer shell was transparent and pure, while inside, 9 violet flames intertwined. That was the Diem Phu seed, the fruit that Fengdi sought daily. Danimon lightly touched the Diem Phu seed with her hand. The monkey general hovered over, calculating if Diem could break this thing. Suddenly, the edge of the pit overflowed with golden water. Danong didn't hesitate, immediately leaving the Diem Phu area. Fengdi transformed into a Hona stream, quickly advancing towards Diem Phu. At this moment, his sole objective was to capture Diem Phu before Taovian arrived. Just as he reached out with his hand towards the Diem Phu seed, a red beam of light fell from the sky, shattering the Hoanga waves rolling up into the sky. Fengdi was startled, immediately creating a clone carrying the Diem Phu seed, diving into the water. He turned to face the newcomer, laughing maniacally. "I didn't expect it to be you," he said before the clone under the water suddenly sensed danger. Taovian suddenly appeared behind him, looking at him with disdain. Why leave so soon? Why not stay a bit longer by Diem's side? Why still on Diem's side? The Hoanga water surged like a celestial tide, sweeping towards everyone. Diem suddenly shouted, "Quick, release the Yem Suan Lin," like thunder awakening everyone. They hurriedly sought shelter from the boiling water. The man with tied hair took a blow to the face, his bones no longer intact. Amidst the chaos, Diem stood still, unmoved. Seeing Danuang return, he asked softly, "What can we do?" Danuang, most worried about Nam City, looked uneasy. Diem calmly smiled, "With you, the forest remains green. What is there to fear without firewood?" Diem shook her head, looking at the giant wave approaching. "Wherever it has come, we must let go." Then, pulling Danuang close to her before the murky, intimidating water, she kissed her deeply under the sparkling stars. Diem pushed Danuang into the void, throwing the coin to Chaitudao hiding under the wooden plank, then returning herself. "If something happens, he'll take her away." Chaitudao stared silently at Diem as the pouring rain continued. Diem stood still, tying the belt around her waist. The system appeared, showing the functions. The belt could kill swine, filth, and humans, and the emblem of the underworld law. Wearing this belt would become the Hinti, unable to leave the Diem Phu event. Hinti could only touch objects, maintaining the original clothing, but unable to use weapons or spatial seals. In the ruined corner of the palace, Van Thai, Tuvian Chiu, tightened his grip around Feng Di's neck. Feng Di looked disdainful, saying that creating a tiger was merely a preliminary action of a true star. At that moment, the amber brain-shaped Diem Phu seed fell. Tuvian Chiu slowly tightened his grip, and Feng Di's eyes widened as he suddenly released his right hand. A gaming device fell from his sleeve, and his left hand frantically pressed buttons. Tuvian Chiu's pupils contracted, knowing that Feng Di wanted to trigger a capability to strike a single blow. A white street occupied the space where he stood, and Feng Di suddenly felt a sharp pain in his right hand. Realizing that Tuvian Chiu had avoided it, he tore off his right hand, holding Feng Di's gaming device. Feng Di hugged his right hand, screaming in pain as it was ripped off. Not far away, Tuvian Chiu held the severed hand, holding the gaming device. He smirked and lightly squeezed his finger, causing the device to shatter. No matter how powerful Tufam was, it depended on Feng Di. Once arrogant and unmatched, he was now utterly humiliated, unable to do anything but stare at Tuvian Chiu. He silently thought that with only his physical body, he couldn't resist, but in the blink of an eye, a giant fist appeared before him. With a single blow, a short man wearing a wooden mask with sharp fangs blocked Tuvian Chiu. Tuvian Chiu sneered, "Lamb, I heard that half of the masters changed owners in 2 years. Why aren't you dead yet?" As Tuvian Chiu tightened his fist again, Fabiately looked at him contemptuously, saying, "Your voice is truly annoying." The two simultaneously glanced at the Diem Phu seed beside them, but at some point, the transparent shell of the Diem Phu seed had been inscribed with the ancient characters of Tufam. Simultaneously, the 9 purple smoke streams inside decreased to 8. Suddenly, a black hole appeared nearby in the sky, and a deep voice echoed from the hole. "Well done, Feng." Tuvian Chiu listened and spoke, finding it strange. 2 years ago, I nearly killed you, but now, who gave you the confidence to be my opponent?" The black hole on the wall chuckled. "I don't need to be your opponent, I just need to hinder you." Many black holes suddenly appeared in the sky. Suddenly, a giant fist pierced through one of the holes, pointing a finger back at Tuvian Chiu. At the bottom of suffering, no one wishes for it. In the realm of suffering, inheritance of the lost association gathers. Tuvian Chiu was startled, realizing he needed to take the Diem Phu seed first. Then their figures and Fabiately vanished simultaneously. A red mask blocked Tuvian Chiu's path. Without hesitation, he kicked straight into the opponent's abdomen, his speed too fast for a reaction. But after Tuvian Chiu's kick, Fabiately remained unfazed, with small drops of blood from the corner of his mouth. Suddenly, countless grotesque masks emerged around Fabiately, surrounding Tuvian Chiu. With a blow, black flames erupted from the masks' mouths, burning Tuvian Chiu into a large torch. Feng Di's spirit soared. "This old man is his true body. Burn him to death," the mask's voice rang out. "My fire can burn 5 celestials, but not you." Tuvian Chiu's worried. He realized that the new successor couldn't use them. The black flames gradually extinguished, and Tuvian Chiu used his hand to crush the broken mask on his face, muttering, "Your new torture is just for show." When the mask shattered, the masks surrounding him also fell. Fabiately remained silent, pointing his finger at the spot next to Tuvian Chiu, squinting. The original small black hole was now as tall as a person, emitting a chilling atmosphere. A man exuded a sinister aura, laughing strangely. Taking advantage of Tuvian Chiu's distraction, Fabiately rushed forward and grabbed his fists. 4 arms tightly held each other in a struggle. Although he looked thin, Fabiately was quite strong. Tuvian Chiu couldn't break free. Suddenly, Tuvian Chiu thrust his knee into Fabiately's abdomen, but he also resisted with his knee. Seeing Tuvian Chiu's attack, the grotesque wooden masks immediately turned their heads. Feng Di, in a suit, clapped his hands. Instantly, a huge Honya wave submerged the two. The powerful attack temporarily separated them. Fumdi waved his hand, and a wave in the water carried away the Diem Phu palace. Fabiately chuckled, saying that even if Fumdi held the Diem Phu seed close, it was only a short distance away, not far from the sky. The distance was less than 100 meters, but Tavian Chiu, hindered by Fabiatli and Fumdi, couldn't move forward. Suddenly, a wooden mask flew out of the murky water, falling under Lydium's feet. Lydium looked down as the mask flew up, hitting her face. The mask seemed to pierce through her, falling to the ground motionless. At that moment, Fabiatli was engaged in a fierce battle with Tuvian Chiu. Startled by what had happened, he wondered what this meant. This wandering warrior had drawn attention to the Diem Phu seed, distracting Tuvian Chiu. In that moment of distraction, Tuvian Chiu delivered a powerful blow to Fabiatli's chest, causing him to spurt blood. Tuvian Chiu waved his hand, hitting the water surface, but the water carried immense power, piercing through Fumdi. The Diem Phu seed fell to the ground, no longer under control. Lydium ignored the battlefield of Yem Xuan Lin and went straight to the Diem Phu seed. Fabiatli noticed Lydium's belt and thought it wasn't good, as it was a special item of Diem Phu. He immediately shouted to Fumdi, asking where his Tufam was. Fumdi sadly replied that it was destroyed by Tuvian Chiu. Hearing this, Tuvian Chiu laughed loudly, not expecting Lydium's belt to have any effect, but finding it amusing that the fake Fabiatli was agitated. At that moment, Fabiatli realized something was wrong as the special item of Diem Phu left Lydium's hand. This seed was now useless. However, within Diem Phu, even a strong individual had to obey some basic rules. Fabiatli's eyes brightened as he looked at Lydium's belt. Without untying it, she couldn't survive. Lydium stood in front of the Diem Phu seed, then turned to look at Tuvian Chiu. Both Tuvian Chiu and Fabiatli looked at Lydium. At this moment, all eyes on the battlefield focused on Lydium. Suddenly, under everyone's gaze, Lydium violently pulled the belt down. A sharp aura emanated from Tuvian Chiu, Fabiatli, and Fumdi, almost breaking Lydium's spirit. Tuvian Chiu glanced at him, thinking that this kid had courage, but the grudge would be trapped in the black hole. Seeing Lydium's gloomy expression, he shouted, "Kill her!" A fierce wind rushed towards the two, and before they could react, their necks were tightly squeezed. Annoyed, Lydium drew her tiger head gun and looked down at the Diem Phu seed. The transparent seed had a purple flame inside, surrounded by 9 vague objects, now clearly visible. One of them had lost its flame, most likely due to Fabiatli's appearance. The remaining 9 strange objects included a dragon-headed tiger with a carved dragon pattern, a lion holding a dragon-shaped incense burner, a dragon-headed snake-tailed creature, a stone tablet with a dragon's head biting an animal bone, and a drop of fresh blood falling on the outer shell of the Diem Phu seed. Lydium didn't hesitate anymore and fiercely slammed the tiger head gun down. The sound echoed as Lydium attacked. The 8 purple flames inside the Diem Phu seed began to stir. Lydium's eyes were furious, the blood vessels around her eyes swollen. In her mind, she heard the words of Danamong. Kohochdu suddenly appeared behind Lydium, hidden, firing continuously at the Diem Phu seed. The sound of the gunshots, combined with the strong destructive power of the tiger head gun and the white feathers of the saddle, poured like a torrent into the Diem Phu seed. The white mark on the surface of the seed gradually spread, causing Lydium's palm to rupture. Blood dripped like arrows, quickly coagulating. The cycle of cutting and freezing continued, but Lydium seemed not to feel any pain, continuing to smash the Diem Phu seed relentlessly. Meanwhile, Tuvian Chiu stood between Lydium and Fabiatli, along with Fumdi. Despite the tsunami of Hoina and the terrifying masks of Fabiatli, they couldn't advance. Tuvian Chiu looked at the two opponents with a dark expression. Although he couldn't kill them immediately, he could still easily hinder them. Fabiatli turned his head, and a heavy mask on his face trembled slightly. The sound of the gunshots continued relentlessly on the surface of the Diem Phu seed. Lydium clenched her teeth and swung the gun with all her might. Finally, a cracking sound echoed as the tiger head handle of the gun fell heavily onto the Diem Phu seed. Fabiatli was startled and was about to rush forward but was stopped. At that moment, Cracks began to spread on the forehead of the stone mask, swallowing Tuvian Chiu. With just one punch, the creature turned into rubble. Tuvian Chiu twisted his body, striking Fabiately in the abdomen. As the sound of the Diem Phu seed cracking filled the air, purple smoke billowed out. In a daze, Ladian remembered Danong's words about the Diem Phu seed. The confirmation of its destructive power had come true, but when she met him, she felt his intense vitality, like the vast sea. As the Diem Phu seed shattered into pieces, the black holes collapsed rapidly and then gradually disappeared. The trapped grudges looked at Lydium with bitterness. "You have the courage to offend me. I'll remember this," one of them said. The confirmation. Tao Chu chuckled at the two, the helpers and caretakers of the fallen, not arriving anymore. Then he said, "Ah, I spoke too soon." Without preparing anything, Tao Chu charged straight towards his formidable opponents. Fabiately was ready to fight to the end, but he didn't expect Tao Chu to act first. Instead of attacking them, Tao Chu lifted the unconscious Lydium and unfurled two black wings over 20 meters long behind him. With one hand holding the unconscious Lydium, Tao Chu looked down at the two below, thinking, "Lydium is quite interesting." Fengdi calmly looked up at the sky and asked, "Father, care for Effendi?" Fabiately lifted his mask, realizing there was no chance for recklessness now. At that moment, a black vortex appeared in the sky, and a man in sportswear, holding a paper cup with the words "Heaven and Earth are useless," appeared before everyone. Then, several fireballs shot out from the black vortex. Chim Duoktin drank the water in the cup without paying any attention to the fireballs around him. He stared intently at Fabiately, hurriedly asking if he was right. Fabiately looked up at the sky and said, "It's been 2 years, and you, little brat, have ascended to the Thapchu position as well." Chim Duoktin didn't say anything else. He threw the paper cup towards the two. The cup grew bigger in midair, and its mouth turned downwards. Inside, there seemed to be a strange light emitting from a black hole. The giant cup covered the two, and in an instant, Fabiately jerked and turned to Fengdi, saying, "A Feng is dead this time." Suddenly, from the white streak in the sky, a giant hand reached out, grabbed the paper cup, and gently threw it back to Chim Duoktin. Chim Duoktin's face turned pale as he caught it. The fingers of the giant hand stretched out again, embracing Fabiately and Fengdi, who were laughing loudly, before slowly retracting. At this moment, Tao Chu's eyes sparkled with anger as he released the words "Yem Suan Lane" and "Tufam Chu" from his mouth. "Although I can't kill you too," said Tufam Chu, and an image of a dark red mask fell in front of them. When the unnamed Hanta tried to react, their body exploded. Chiutam felt a hot rush in his nose, as if his soul wanted to leave his body. Then he was crushed under the weight. Chuvo hugged him tightly, using her body to shield him. Chatudeo looked at the ghostly figure of the dark red mask and thought, "This old man is so ruthless, wanting to kill everyone in one go." Then, the black wings swung fiercely, and Tavian Chu charged towards his opponents. Chim Duoktin was startled and called out to Tuvian Chu, "It's not time yet." Hearing the call, Tavian Chu halted, furious, looking at the disappearing figures. Then, he quickly activated a skill to envelop himself. Vosen was hit by a red light column when the red light disappeared. Chim Duoktin sniffed, asking where the smell of fresh blood came from. The smoke cleared, revealing half of Vosen's body, leaning against the railing silently. He sat down on the ground exhausted, not expecting to end up like this in the end. Chiutam's lips trembled, looking at the piece of fabric in his hand with disbelief, while Chiuvo cried out bitterly. Around her were the broken pieces of Chiuvo's body. Meanwhile, Lydium was gradually waking up, his mind filled with blurry images. He touched his chest and opened his eyes wide when he realized he had regained consciousness. Danong hugged his knees, looking at him. "Damn it, it's because I wanted to come back," Danong said angrily. "It felt terrible being thrown out by you." Lydium laughed and asked Danong what the situation was. Danong helped Lydium stand up and said, "You can see for yourself." At this moment, the magnificent architecture had completely collapsed. The air was still filled with the white streaks of Tufam. The scent of blood lingered in the air. Looking into the distance, in the area not invaded by Tufim's forces, only this place remained. Diem silently thought of Longjia's parents, the old man guarding the gate, and the millions of people in Yendo, as well as the monsters that appeared at midnight, probably turning into endless white streaks now. The rain continued to pour relentlessly. Longjia knelt on the ruins silently. Diem was about to speak when Longjia suddenly turned and growled, "Who are you people?" Then, the sound of footsteps echoed, attracting everyone's attention. After slapping Chu Tam, Tao Vian regained his composure. "We can't talk yet, can we?" Chu Tam knelt down, curling up, still silent, only looking at the piece of fabric in his hand. Tao Vian sighed and approached Chu Tam. At that moment, Dan Oong suddenly blocked Tu Vian path. Tao Vian stopped and glanced at Dan Oong. "You can't stop me," he said. Seeing this, Diem bowed his head and approached. "She's still a child. You don't have to do this." Tao Vian shook his head. "You won't make her wake up. She's already finished." Meanwhile, Chetu Dao sat on a collapsed pillar, continuously smoking and filling the ashtray with cigarette butts. Half of Vosen's body was slumped against the railing, silent. He squeezed a stone, making a cracking sound. This time, out of the 164 Hantaw who participated in Diem Phu, except for 4, none survived. Chim Duoktin took a few steps forward, bowing deeply to everyone. "This incident is our fault. On behalf of all the Fap Chu members, I assure you that we will compensate fairly for the unexpected situation at Diem Phu. Besides, I will answer any questions you have later." Vosen, still silent, was the first to ask about Diem Phu. From Hantaw Tam Than to Hantaw Thapto, like us, there were a total of 8 thresholds. The 10 Thap Chu of Diem Phu, the top 10 Hantaw, are the most outstanding. I want to ask you too, which threshold do you belong to? Chim Duoktin calmly answered, "I am the Ngufuang Lao, and Tavian Chiu beside me is the Tungdo. The one in the vest, Fumdi, is probably the Hantaw 6. The person with a mask similar to mine is also the Ngufuang Lao." Vosen listened attentively, then chuckled and said, "The senior master has explained everything to us thoroughly. I don't have any more questions. Thank you for saving my life, that's the truth." Kim Duoktin nodded and glanced at Chetu Dao, who waved his hand, indicating that he had no questions at the moment. Diem stepped forward and asked, "Once we leave, what will happen to this matter?" The one who answered this time was Tao Vian Chiu. "I will heal the wound of this matter, and everything will return to normal. This incident will be forgotten by everyone. The core of this matter has been shattered, so the repair time could be 100 years. Diem nodded, indicating that he had no more questions at the moment. Chiu Tam remained silent, still holding the piece of cloth. Tao Vian Chiu took a deep breath, then sat down in front of Chiu Tam. "Those who die, die. Tu Fam doesn't care about life either. If you want to leave Diem Phu, I will help you get the moonstone." After that, he stood up and walked away. As he passed Diem, he whispered, "There will be no one secretly using obstacles to deal with you anymore." After he left, Diem and Tao Vian Chiu stood next to Chim Duoktin. "If there are no more questions, I will inform the Hotho to escort you out of Diem Phu. We have big tasks ahead." Dan Nong leaned in and whispered to Diem, "I've kept the items in your mouth." Diem smiled as if he had just made a surprising discovery. But when Chim Duoktin was about to lead everyone away, Chu Tam suddenly stood up. "I want to handle my brother's body first." Tao Vian Chiu didn't say anything more, indicating his agreement. Chetu Dao smoked a few cigarettes and asked Chu Tam if he needed a fire. Chu Tam hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Chetu Dao walked to the blood-stained area, clasped his hands together, and set fire to it, bidding farewell to Chu Vo. Diem watched the flames burning the body and suddenly said to Dan Nong, "I'm about to die. It's good that you did that." Dan Nong hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, "The general won't have that day." After everyone left, Chim Duoktin said to Tao Vian Chiu, "Your decision-making is impressive." Chim Duoktin continued, "Flattening Tu Fam like this requires you to spend more than 55 years of life and sleep for 2 years. Our result is to abandon this plan and protect your health. Before he finished speaking, Tao Vien Chiu interjected, I don't agree. Chim Duk Tin calmly replied, I will report back. Seeing that, Tao Vien Chiu wanted to ensure that his wife would not encounter any trouble while he was away, and Chim Duk Tin had already assured him of that. In the blink of an eye, Ted and Yen Du City was full of colorful lights and flowers, and the festive atmosphere filled the air as usual. Mother Long Jia silently wrapped chung cakes, while Uncle sat on a bamboo chair smoking a tobacco pipe. Suddenly, there was an urgent knock on the door. Father Long Jia opened the door and looked outside, seeing a disheveled man standing in front of the door. Father Luong trembled and exclaimed, Our son has returned. Then he knelt down in front of the two elders, crying bitterly. A quiet silence enveloped the entire house, and darkness shrouded the electric light. Dan returned to his familiar place once again. The scenery of Yendu was vivid in his mind. The Hoangha River, the rolling hills of Feng Dai, the massed mountains of Tai Biat Lai. Before leaving, Dan Nong also regenerated his body and disappeared into the world of money. When Lai Diem opened his eyes, he saw Cha Tiu Dao sitting on his right. The two faced each other. What surprised Lai Diem was that he didn't return to his empty room, but appeared with a knife-wielding man in a grand hall. In the darkness, the two remained silent as they examined their accounting rewards. The system announced, You have completed this Diem Phu event. The total number of Diem Phu completed is Yem Zion Lin. The evaluation of your performance in this Diem Phu event is superior. There is no deduction of points for this recovery. The accounting report is as follows. Diem Phu points are accounted for as superior with 300 points. The limit of the right to purchase is 103. Currently, you have 1,150 Diem Phu points. This is an absconding case. There may be more Diem Phu heritage. There are no special rewards. Lai Diem thought to himself, this Diem Phu event is over, and there are no special rewards, but I still got 5 volumes of Diem Phu scripture. The purchasing power limit is low, so it seems that the discovery and impact on Diem Phu haven't been significant. At this point, Cha Tiu Dao spoke up. I need to transfer 5,000 Diem Phu points. Lai Diem nodded, ready to transfer the money, but the knife-wielding man suddenly said, There's no need for any sudden events. I can't help you anyway. Consider it taken care of. Lai Diem was slightly surprised by Cha Tiu Dao's generous words. Such generosity is rare in Diem Phu, Lai Diem thought. He nodded without showing any expression at the moment. Cha Tiu Dao continued, however, can you lend me 1,000 points? I'll pay you back after the event if you agree. Let's find the certified Diem Phu together. Lai Diem didn't refuse, instead asking Cha Tiu Dao, what do you need so many points for? Cha Tiu Dao didn't beat around the bush and directly showed Lai Diem the content of his purchase rights. It was a rare type of celestial heritage priced at 3,000 Diem Phu points. Lai Diem cackled bitterly to himself, realizing that despite risking his life in battles, the biggest gains always seemed to fall into someone else's hands. He shrugged, honestly telling the person holding the knife that he only had over 500 points left, and it would be best to wait for compensation from Diem Phu. At that moment, the knife-wielding individual suggested forming a team, with each member contributing 300 points as expenses. Lai Diem thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The current fighting style was quite costly, and Cha Tiu Dao's experiments could help him reduce fatigue after exerting his power. Moreover, Cha Tiu Dao had strong combat abilities and rich experience, making him a suitable teammate for Lai Diem. However, being teammates required considering personalities, compatibility, and a sense of responsibility. If two people had conflicting values, it would be difficult for them to progress together, even with shared benefits. Currently, Lai Diem and Cha Tiu Dao lacked a reliable foundation, so perhaps it was better to wait until they had better quality. Lai Diem decided to use an ideological test to sign a contract with Cha Tiu Dao. But not now. Seeing Lai Diem looking around, Cha Tiu Dao asked if he had never been here before. This is the exchange space for group members. If our cooperative relationship ends, this space will collapse too, Lai Diem explained. He looked at Cha Tiu Dao, saying that even this time was his 5th Diem Phu event. Chet Dao was surprised, saying he had only been here for 6 months. Diem corrected it to 4 months and then asked if Chet Dao and Vosen knew more about Diem Phu than he did. Chet Dao didn't hide anything and explained the ranks of Thapto, which included Tangia Thapto, 9 Du, 8 Diem, 7 Kung, 6 Tai, 5 Phuong Lao, 2 Pho and 3 Than, totaling 9 ranks across 4 tiers. The higher the rank, the more autonomy and privileges one had. To advance in rank, besides meeting basic conditions, one needed to complete increasingly difficult events. The higher the rank, the more challenging it became. Some Hanto intentionally participated in Diem Phu events just to increase their rank. To reach Thapto, one needed to achieve 39% inheritance enlightenment in any discipline, 9 Du required 69%, and 8 Diem required 99%. To reach 7 Kung, one needed to become an inheritance faker. 5 Phuong Lao could move freely. All participants of Diem Phu knew this, and no events needed to be completed. Diem listened carefully, thinking about the 5 Phuong Lao. Characters like Tavian seemed to endure, reminiscent of the 1950s style. Those born after 1980 rarely named themselves like that, perhaps indicating Chim Duokshin was over 50 years old. No one knew how long Diem Phu had existed. After understanding everything, Diem proactively asked for Chet Dao's phone number, agreeing to meet again. Before parting ways, Chet Dao mentioned buying heritage rights, specifically the Koichithian Quian Type 5, which could fetch a starting price of 5,000 points if auctioned. Still, he needed to gather 3,000 points as soon as possible. After Chet Dao left, Diem smoked a pipe, contemplating his future direction. His current issue was increasing consciousness with his gradually slower physical reflexes, unable to keep up with his speed. Thus, he needed to prepare the Yemzianlian part at least. Otherwise, he might experience dissociation between his consciousness and body. To adapt his consciousness to his current body, he needed extensive training, but its effectiveness was uncertain. The best method was still finding artifacts to enhance reaction speed or finding abilities in Diem Phu. Diem reviewed his skills, with the most terrifying being the Horror Blade, aiding him well in events. The 9 Phoenix Divine Talisman enhanced Kohochju's consciousness. The Assassin's Rush was highly effective but lacked utility. He would replace it when he found a suitable skill. Diem bought a Diem Phu jar and received a golden pig with short-term paralysis capabilities, single use only. Diem chuckled, believing that with perseverance, the goddess of luck would eventually show herself. After everything was over, Diem returned to the real world. Over 10 years ago, a boy followed his father to Fuongnam City, famous for martial arts. Under his father's arrangements, the boy studied under 6 masters to learn traditional Fuongnam martial arts. However, as an outsider, he was always discriminated against. After several years feeling resentful, he wanted the natives to acknowledge him and address him respectfully. However, his father, to establish himself in the martial arts community, chose to submit under a great martial artist, Quan Diem Dao. But Quan Diem Dao refused to accept him as a disciple, so he had to submit to another great martial artist, Loi Hong Sin. However, he was still not recognized by the Fuongnam martial artists after over 10 years, even after his talented father passed away at the age of 40. After crying for his father, he took off his hat, smiled, and began destroying the signs of 19 martial arts schools, gaining notoriety in the Fuongnam martial arts community. People called him Heijiang the Tiger Beast, but he isolated himself from the Fuongnam martial arts community. Diem walked out of the terminal at Diem Than Airport wearing a white shirt. Diem had been waiting in the car for a while. Glancing back at Diem listened as Diem explained the current situation with the Martial Arts Association, mentioning the competition with Thukichu for the chairmanship. They had faced disruptions from Lo Vo Quan and had barely survived with the help of Master Truong Minvian. However, Thukichu's roots in Dongthan were too deep. Diem didn't waste time and directly asked what Diem needed him to do. Diem's face turned angry as he mentioned that the Hong Ting clan's headquarters, led by Quan Diem Dao, was facing a crisis due to his illness. At the mention of Quan Diem Dao's name, Diem's expression darkened, asking which hospital Diem Dao was in. It was raining lightly as they arrived at the public hospital's internal medicine department. As Lydium stepped onto the stairs, he heard a commotion. A man with blonde hair was yelling and pointing at a small nurse, berating the hospital staff. Lydium approached the nurse and asked where Diem Dao's room was. The girl, holding back tears, replied, indicating room 6 to the left. Lydium remained calm, ignoring the crowded hallway as he walked through. He pushed forcefully past the man with blonde hair, who initially responded angrily but gradually became quiet, his voice fading away. Lydium walked through the crowd, which automatically parted, slowly backing away. Suddenly, he stopped. A beautiful girl, visibly angry, asked him why he was there. Lydium licked his lips and asked if Latu Quan had died yet. Hearing this, the girl slapped him in anger, but he only gently pushed her hand away before delivering a powerful slap to her face. She was his granddaughter, and she fell silent, touching her swollen cheek. The men behind her said nothing, and an eerie silence filled the air. Lydium pushed the door open and entered the room, where he saw an old man with brown hair lying on the bed, his face youthful. Tubes and syringe holes covered his body. Diem Dao opened his eyes, his dark gaze meeting Lydium's. "I thought you wouldn't come back in this lifetime," he said with a hint of surprise. "Sit down, Loi That's granddaughter," Diem Dao added. Lydium looked at the old man, feeling indescribably moved. At the age of 52, he had followed 6 masters to Guangdong, being discriminated against as a foreigner. But now, returning, he felt the weight of unfinished business from his youth. He had wanted to greet Diem Dao, but the words stuck in his throat. Diem Dao sat up in bed, addressing Lydium. "This time, I'm afraid I won't make it. Are you planning to stay for long?" he asked. He also knew that the martial arts hall had been sold a long time ago, and once this matter was settled, Lydium should leave immediately. With a sigh, the old man looked at Lydium. "Until today, only talking to you has eased my heart. Back then, your father, Lai Than Lam, came to Guangdong to find me, not Loi Hong Xin." "Why did he seek out Loi Hong Xin?" Lydium responded.